You ever notice how the craziest stories always start with some version of 911? What's your emergency? Well, that's exactly what blasted through my security system at 8:47 a.m. on a random Wednesday. When Patty Williams, the HOA president who thinks she's the queen of the entire county, decided to call the cops on my boat, my houseboat, anchored right on my own private lake on land my family's owned for 3 generations. That's how she started her war, screaming about illegal watercraft and community safety, even though the only thing my boat threatened was her ego. While she was out there flapping her arms demanding I be arrested in front of 3 actual police officers, I was inside my workshop quietly making a call that would change both our lives forever. See, Patty thought she was wrecking my week, but in the end, she handed me the keys to her kingdom. And if you've ever tangled with an HOA, you know that's not just a figure of speech. I'll back up a sec because the morning actually started out picture perfect. The sunlight hit the fresh varnish on the deck of my boat, the Wanderer. 32 feet of stubborn ambition and nostalgia. 18 months I'd spent breathing life back into her sanding wiring, learning marine electronics from YouTube, and mistakes my granddad would have been proud. He built his first boat on this land in 1947 when Lake Oak Haven was just a muddy patch nobody cared about. Now here I am, 3 generations later, keeping the tradition alive. By 9:15, after a tense dance with the winch and a few curse words under my breath, the Wanderer slipped into the water, floating true, no leaks, just that deep purr of a diesel engine humming like a cat. I stood on the dock, coffee in hand, watching my project rock gently. To me, that's the American dream. Not some sprawling mansion, just a good boat, good coffee, and a lake I don't have to share with busybodies. Except, of course, that's never how it goes. Around 10, Maggie Foster and her ancient golden retriever came walking down the public path. "Beautiful boat, Jake," she hollered, waving like she was calling the bingo numbers. She's lived in the subdivision for decades, always friendly, never the type to stir up drama. But what neither of us knew was that her innocent wave would trigger a chain of events, ending with someone in handcuffs. Spoiler, it wasn't me. Half an hour later, just as I'm checking navigation lights, I hear the slam of 3 car doors in rapid fire. Never a good sign. I look up, and here comes Patty Williams marching across my lawn like she's leading the D-Day invasion. Bleach blonde helmet hair, face already turning that shade of angry lobster red, and behind her the usual HOA board lackeys looking embarrassed but loyal as cocker spaniels. "You will remove that eyesore immediately," Patty barked, pointing at my boat like she was swearing at a suspect. I set my coffee down, slow and steady. Learned years ago, the calmer you are, the more it rattles bullies. "Good morning to you too, Patty," I say. "Which eyesore are we talking about today?" She's nearly vibrating with rage, jabbing at the Wanderer. That floating piece of garbage is violating at least 7 HOA regulations. Now here's the catch about HOA regulations. They only apply if you actually live in the HOA. I just smiled and asked which ones, and she rattled off a list. Visual impact property values, unauthorized watercraft, none of which apply to a private lake that's been in my family since my grandfather dug it out in the 60s. I offered to show her the property survey, but she waved it off. "Everyone knows that lake is community property," she insisted, like she could will it into truth. So I did what any rational adult would do. I pulled out my phone and started calling the county assessor's office loud enough for Patty to hear. That's when she panicked and dialed 911 right there on my lawn, giving the operator some wild story about illegal construction and threats to children's safety. The cops were on their way, she announced, beaming like she'd just won the lottery. But just then my own phone buzzed. Frank Henderson, the HOA's co-founder guy, never calls anyone unless the world is ending, texted 4 words. "Answer now." Game changer. My heart skipped. Last time Frank called something a game changer, half the board wound up indicted. He said, "Jake, where are you?" I told him I was watching Patty melt down on my dock. "Good. Don't go anywhere." I'm at the courthouse. Patty's about to lose the lease on the HOA Marina. They're 89 days delinquent. I can sell the whole property today if you want it, but you've got 5 hours. Suddenly my day went from petty drama to high-stakes real estate heist. The Marina wasn't just some building. It was Patty's HQ, her office, her status symbol, her empire. I did some fast math, thinking about all the antiques I'd sold from my grandfather's collection, all the tools and furniture I'd parted with, supposedly to fund my woodworking business. Was this what it had all been for? I said yes before my common sense could argue. While Patty strutted and ranted outside, the sirens rolled in. Officer Martinez, who's been putting up with Patty's antics for 15 years, stepped out looking tired enough to need a vacation. "Ma'am, you called about an illegal houseboat," Patty pointed. Made her speech about danger to children, but Martinez cut her off. "Is this your property, sir?" I showed him the deed, the tax receipts, the survey, digital copies always. Martinez turned to Patty. "Ma'am, this is private property. The boat is legal. If you keep calling 911 for non-emergencies, you'll be the one facing charges." Patty went from red to purple, and I swear her voice could have stripped paint. But in the end, Martinez escorted her and her bored cronies right off my land. She shrieked, "This isn't over," as she left, but I was already sprinting to my truck, hands shaking not from fear, but adrenaline. 5 hours to raise $500,000. First, I begged the bank for a fast-track loan against my workshop. Sandra, the loan officer, pulled some strings. Then I made the hardest call of my life, selling the last piece of my grandfather's legacy, a mahogany cabinet he swore I'd never part with. Marcus, the antique dealer, brought a cashier's check, and as I watched them bubble wrap and haul out that cabinet, it felt like burying a family member. Still short, I remembered the old fishing boat in my barn. Grandpa's first big project. A collector wired me $70,000 on the spot. By 2:15 p.m., I was sitting in Frank's lawyer's office, hands shaking as I signed the papers. At 2:21, the wire cleared. At 2:30, I owned Azure Springs Marina. Meanwhile, Patty was at the marina throwing an emergency HOA meeting announcing my punishment for daring to float a boat on my own lake. Maggie texted me updates from inside. Patty had a PowerPoint my boat with a big red X over it. Threats of lawsuits and injunctions. She had no clue I now owned the very building she was screaming in. So I walked in right as she was wrapping up her rant. "You have no right to be here," she shrieked, "but I raised the deed for all to see. Actually, Patty, I own this marina now. Your lease is terminated." Dead silence. Then the crowd exploded, some in cheers, some in disbelief. Frank strolled in with a folder full of evidence, missing money embezzlement, all tied to Patty. She tried to buy him off, threatened lawsuits, then finally lost it. Threw a glass of water at me, missed by a mile. It was beautiful. The whole room had their phones out, catching her meltdown in HD. Frank handed the evidence to the district attorney. Patty tried to run, literally tripped and limped out to her car. Within 48 hours, she was arrested at the airport with a suitcase full of cash trying to get to Costa Rica. The mugshot went viral, her mascara running hair a mess, her empire in ruins. Turns out she'd been laundering HOA funds, paying off loan sharks, blackmailing residents. Her own mother sent me a letter apologizing for what her daughter had become. But here's the part that stuck with me. 6 months later, after all the news trucks left, after the memes faded, and the lawyers got paid, I'm back on the dock with my coffee. The Wanderer now covered in a mural painted by local kids. A little girl named Emma had asked to paint everyone welcome. Here on the hull, stick figures of all colors holding hands. I watched families fish off the pier, seniors doing Tai Chi, kids laughing, where once there'd only been fear and fines. That's community. That's what I'd wanted all along. Frank sat with me one evening, grinning like a kid. "Regrets?" he asked. I thought about the cabinet in the museum, the boat in California, the money, the stress, the threats. Not a one, I told him. Power only works if you let it. Bullies only win if nobody stands up. But just as I started to think peace had returned, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You destroyed my daughter. Now it's your turn." Patty's ex-husband, wealthy, vindictive, and twice as ruthless. That's another story for another time, but here's what matters. Bullies always overreach. Sometimes the only way to stop them is to play the long game, to outlast and outthink, and if you have to outbid. And if you're dealing with a Patty in your own life, just remember you're not alone. There are more of us than there are of them. So tell me, what would you have done? Ever faced down an HOA bully, given up something you love for something bigger? Drop your story below, because this saga isn't over. Round 2 is just getting started. And if you want to see what happens when the ex-husband tries his luck, stick around. After all, the best revenge is a community that thrives.